G'day everyone, and welcome back to Risky Rollers. I'm Dalton, and today we're going to be taking our terrain game to the next level, the amazing scenic box of terrain from Lord of Terrain. Huge thanks to Lord of Terrain for sponsoring the video. Check links out down in the description below. Sending us this box of terrain to get into and paint today. I can't wait, it's going to be a lot of fun. So come with me to the painting table, and let's crack right on. Alright, let's not waste any time, we'll get right into it. The first thing I've noticed here is the packaging and the presentation here. The box is a beautiful printed setup here. You've got a magnetic flip on the front here, and the whole thing just feels really good quality. Now, opening it up, you see all these little packaging peanuts and things. Honestly, this is probably what I would do to move this terrain. Pulling out the pieces here, the main thing I'm impressed by is just the quality and sort of variance across them. So each individual piece, there's a few different styles of them, and each individual piece is cast in resin. It's not 3D printed. There's a subtle difference you can get between 3D printed and cast pieces, with just the crispness of corners and edges and things, and the way that paint will take to them. So I'm really keen to actually get some paint on these. Speaking of paint, you'll notice that they are grey. So these were sent to me primed grey, which I'll actually use to my advantage a bit when I go and do a prime in a minute. The variety of pieces looks fantastic. You've got these pools here, which are going to have sort of this disgusting sludge and ooze in the middle with these little like growths or egg looking things around the side. These little fantastic little birthing pools or emulsification pools, or whatever you want to call them for Tyranids. And then moving on, we have a couple of different designs of like, I don't know what you'd call these, spires, these like growths sticking out of the ground. You can imagine these just punching out of the earth as a Tyranid force advances and sort of grows into the planet and starts really getting into consuming all the biomass. This is a planet in late stage of a Tyranid invasion and consumption. My favorite pieces by far are these massive, long spire-looking things here. Instantly gives them height and depth to the table, and instantly tell you exactly what sort of terrain we're looking at. Finally, you've got these big chunky pieces here. Yeah, these are solid. There's a bit of weight behind these. As I mentioned before, it's cast resin, so it's a little bit heavier. There's a nice big hollow gap underneath here, so it's not just using loads and loads of material, but they're still decent weight. You're not going to be knocking these around and having them slide all over the board during a game. And again, the quality on these look fantastic. You've got all these details in here. I'm thinking about how I'm going to paint these. I might paint these up with like a horrible fleshy little, like pinky fleshy tones in these bits, as opposed to the pools with like a ruddy sludge color. These are fantastic. You've got a bunch of different sizes of things as well. These sort of triangular or almost like pyramid looking spires. You've got 3 distinct sizes of small ones you can hide a lad behind, all the way through to quite tall ones that are going to even give a dreadnought sized model a decent bit of cover, as well as just sort of break up the variety on the table and have different sizes of things going on. Alright, so with all this out, there's a lot of stuff here. It's going to take me a hot minute to get through, but choose a couple of pieces specifically to show on camera. We're going to go out, I'm going to prime them, and then we'll be right back and get stuck into painting. Alright, I'm going to get these primed up, and I don't have enough hands for this. With the whole thing primed in Wraithbone, with a little bit of the grey showing through in the recesses, it was time to decide what colour scheme I'm doing. Now, fortunately enough for this video, actually complete coincidence, I hadn't planned to do it with it, but it worked out quite nicely. One of my good friends that I work with has actually just recently been gifted a whole bunch of Tyranids from the Leviathan box set and is busy painting them up. So I thought a really great way to sort of have a nice thematic intro game for him would be to paint up this Tyranid terrain with the same colour scheme. So he's a phenomenal painter, he just hasn't played before, to the point where he'll put my Tyranid paint scheme on these to shame. His models look fantastic. And they've gone for a tan flesh colour with green carapace and sort of reddy orangey claws and different bits and pieces of interest through that. So we're going to be replicating that today on these pieces of terrain. Starting out with some skeleton horde from Citadel and just slapping some contrast on. This is terrain, it doesn't need to be too neat. Grab a big brush, ideally one with a decent point, because it does help you get into all the recesses, especially in such detailed terrain as this, and just slather it all over. Contrast on terrain is fantastic, it's such a good way to get a lot of colour down quickly. Now, one of the ways I like to get a handle on a model, or a whole project, is to do up 1 or 2 models specifically, and even as a microcosm of that, doing up certain parts of the model to get a feel for the texture, the detail, sort of how much work's going to have to go into each piece, and how I'm actually going to approach the work for that. So these 2 pieces here will serve as the first 2 that I do to give representative of the entire set. And even smaller than that, this first layer of skeleton horde going over all the fleshy bits sort of that aren't carapace and that aren't claws and things will serve as a really great way to get a feel and a sense for the detail of the model. Honestly, I'm really impressed. It goes really well. The paint goes on really nice and smoothly, picks up all the detail. There's actually like a few different types of texture in this fleshy bit here, all of which will look really nice along sort of different varieties of Tyranid models. So that's been really well done, and I'm really enjoying just slapping this over it. Now, the second piece I've chosen to do as part of the video and as part of what I'm doing to try it out is this little sort of birthing pool type thing here. Mainly because it gives the most variety and texture from the sort of upright stalk. All these egg things, I've decided I'm not gonna do anything crazy. I'm gonna paint them the same way as though they're Tyranids themselves. They're gonna have that tan, fleshy color, the green carapace sticking up around the outside. But then we've got all this nice rocky texture around the outside and this big bubbling pool in the middle here, which I think I've got a few different ideas for how to do that, to have a lot of fun with that texture. So you can see here, same thing as with the stalk, just slapping down some contrast skeleton horde over all of those egg bits. With all of that fleshy detail picked out with the skeleton horde, it's time to move on to the carapace. This is the next big pop of color and the next biggest section on the miniatures. Now for this we're using Dark Angel's green. Now this is a really nice contrast. Going over Wraithbone actually means that you get a really quite diverse range of greens and shades once the contrast starts to dry. So you could definitely, even basically after you put this on, just stop and call it done. Put some more contrast paint over the little horns and sticky out bits in the front and just call it a day there. This looks fantastic straight over Wraithbone, and these models really lend themselves to contrast, filling in details, adding depth to it, and really bringing out all of the different detail that makes it such a good piece to have on the tabletop. That said, I am definitely planning to take it a step further and do a few more bits and pieces on it. One of the ineffable things about models that we sometimes hear about, sometimes talk about, you sometimes find on different sculpts, and some lend themselves better to it than others, is how well paint flows onto a model and how it feels to paint it. And this flowing on here really well. Especially picking at this carapace bit, I found myself really enjoying the process of just working my way up this stalk. And then even once I moved across to the little pods and started adding all the carapace around the outside of the little eggy pod bits on the birthing pool, just the process of pulling paint up the model, pulling paint up these bits here, felt really, really good. It's something that's hard to define, and I probably couldn't explain why it feels that way. All I know is that some models you get it and some models you don't, and I'm definitely feeling it with these. Alright, so as I smash out the rest of this here, you can see my inexperience being on camera while painting because my hands are obviously getting in the way a lot. But as I smash these out, I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next and all the details and things we're going to bring out. So while I finish this up, go and grab some more paints and move on to the next section. Let's hear a little bit from our sponsor, Lord of Terrain, about this terrain set that he's devised. Alright, so moving on, we are using some Moot Green from Citadel to add all these highlights and streaky bits to the dark green here. You can take this a lot further, but as I mentioned earlier in the video, given this is terrain, we are going to be stopping a little bit short of everything we could do with it. This was a lot of fun. This is probably not quite, well, it's one of my favourite steps for sure, of this whole process. You can see me getting right involved, my head pokes into the bottom of the video there. But this whole bit was a lot of fun. You get to really define all the edges. Moot Green as a paint is one I've struggled with in the past, but it was a lot of fun to use its transparency to help reinforce it, and have actually different shades and different saturations on the model with a single paint, on both the giant spire and then on the little egg bits. A little bit of carapace really picking out that green really sells the idea of this at a distance from the table. Moving on from there, making sure to hit every single bit of green on the egg bits. Moving on, the next bit to work on are the little horns, protrusions, teeth-looking things on the spire. We're using some corn red from Citadel to lay down a really solid deep red base. This acts as a really phenomenal counterpoint to the green that's the rest of the model. Gives it a nice, strong focal point, helps direct the eye up and down the stalk, and just adds a bit of a colour pop to the terrain and the scenery. So going from there, making sure to hit every bit of it along here. Often we'll need a couple of layers, but this is really just laying down a foundation colour. We are going to be adding some other reds to really firm it up as we go along. You can see me moving around the model. It's a very big piece of something to paint. If you're painting a model this size, you're not going to be working in sub-assemblies, but as it's a big single cast terrain piece, sometimes it can be a bit of a struggle to manage across it. The next bit was, of course, Mephiston red, which is a brighter red from Citadel, going through and really making sure all these bits are covered in a nice opaque red and just a bit brighter. It's going to be working into the highlights that we're going to add in a moment to really make these pop, to match the intensity of the mood green on the green carapace. Speaking of which, we're going on to using the Fire Dragon Bright, which is a really beautiful saturated orange paint from Citadel. It's very thin, and it's worth knowing that it does tend to be quite transparent, but for our purposes here, this is actually perfect. We're almost glazing it on, focusing it up on the raised edges of each of the teeth bits here, in the lead up to highlighting with the yellow in a moment. Real yellow from Citadel is the colour of choice here. It's not necessarily my favourite yellow, but it works well with this colour palette, and just highlights. You can see me picking out the tops of each of those there, and then glazing over the entirety of these red bits with Blood Red, which is the speed paint from Army Painter. I'm very impressed with all of the Army Painter speed paints. If you've been following the blog, you'll have seen a bit of a review of them on there. You can check it at riskyrollers.com.au. But this just glazes all those colours together and gives it a really vivid colour over there. Mantis Warrior Green is next. This is something you could definitely skip on the terrain, but I think adds a nice bit of colour and texture to it, and really sells the organic idea and the organic nature of it. We're glazing this right up to the edge of the carapace on the big flatter surfaces. So by pulling it in the corners and washing your brush off, and then actually pulling against the paint, so from where the areas where there is no paint back into the area of paint, you get a really nice transition and spread of this colour. Gives you a deep saturated green right up in the recesses close to the carapace, but then a very faded one all the way down to the end there. Really sells the idea of it all as one connected piece that it all works together on. Making sure to get a little bit at the tip at the top up here. Again, ties it all together. This looks really, really nice when there's a whole bunch of it all painted and set together. Then going on to the little breeding pool area here, making sure to get this green on the interior of all the eggs to sell that there's something a bit off and different about them, as well as little areas of it sort of around the green carapace that's on the outside of the eggs, but also around different areas of it. I wanted to try and sell the idea that potentially there was just under the surface little bits of carapace or little bits of hardened green areas sort of pushing through, or just under the surface for it. You can see me there on the very edge of camera because I'm still figuring out how to properly work with this frame, keeping it done there. Crusader Flesh is next. This was hands down my favourite addition to the whole paint job. It wasn't what I originally had planned for this pool area here, but alongside doing the video and recording all these, I was painting a bunch of other pieces of terrain to use, which you'll see later in the video. And one of the developments while we were doing that, because I was talking to Dean, the gentleman I'm going to play with his Tyranids painting in this scheme, was that all of these bits ended up becoming a really horrific fleshy tone. So Crusader Flesh gives this very disturbingly accurate Caucasian flesh tone to the area here, which I love the look of. Druchii Violet from Citadel then being stippled onto some of the more stressed areas on here, giving the idea of bruised flesh. And it's important to do this while the Crusader Flesh or Crusader Skin from Army Painter was still wet, because it helps blend them together so you don't get the blotchy sort of dry mark or watermarked look from the shades that you can get sometimes. when you get like dry lines and so on the model. This way it blends nicely and you just get this really distressed, bruised flesh look. The next step for this was adding some Carroburg Crimson, also from Citadel. It's a red wash. Adding this to around the edge of the fleshy areas and anywhere that looks stressed but not actually deformed. So things like, if we're thinking about this as skin, we're looking for things where stuff is pushing through or poking out of it. Different areas that could be stretch marks or scarring or anything like that. Just make it look really red and worried. Really selling the idea that it may not be fluid. This might be a whole lump of flesh that's being pushed around and expanding and moving. Then we move on to adding a bit of context. All the stuff is basically done. This is now just basing functionally. This was good. This was good. I just used some Sterling mud from Citadel, but any texture paint would work. All the ground area around all these terrain pieces, which almost all of them have, are beautifully generic but still shaped. So as you can see here, it just sells the idea that there is a setting for this, and I'm painting this in a way that matches probably the mats that I'm going to use them on. And it's done in such a way that this was really easy to do. It covers the whole area. You could spend as long or as little as you wanted on this. There's lovely detail there that you could very easily paint up as rubble and ruins and grey textures, or different kinds of dirt and so on. Or you can just do what I'm doing here, which is a fairly lazy effort, but just covering it all up with this and just letting it be a very realistic, very nice looking shaped ground. Then I took a couple of greens, sort of desaturated lighter greens, and just stippled these into, again, the still wet Sterling mud. This adds a bit of depth to it, adds a bit of texture, suggests a bit of growth and a bit of grass without needing to go into flocking, anything like that. The final step I did here before I dry brush on the outside, and I could do this while it was all still wet and drying, was added a layer of gloss varnish to the fleshy bits. A quick dry brush of Steel Legion drab over all of the brown and green before, just ties it all together, picks out some of the details, and brings us to the end of painting these models. And here you can check out all the entire finished piece in all its glory. Now, most importantly of all, let's get all these down to the local game store onto the table and see how they look with some models. Overall, I've got about a third of the whole terrain set painted up for this. Dean and I played a combat patrol game, and I walked him through how to play with his gorgeous Tyranids next to this gorgeous Tyranid terrain. We had an absolute blast, had a great time rolling some dice and seeing a bunch of models moving around. And really, the table really helped sell it. I can't speak highly enough of how good this looked and how much fun we had seeing the narrative of the Tyranids brought to life on the table, especially matching up with his scheme there, as my Dark Eldar tried and failed and were completely eaten as they attempted to place some blasting charges and destroy some of these breeding pools on here. Thanks to this stunning terrain set, we had a fantastic looking table and just a really great game. So huge thanks to Dean for the game, and thanks to Dylan over at Lord of Terrain for sponsoring this video and creating a phenomenal terrain set. Make sure to check them out. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, leave any feedback down below, and we'll catch you next time.